Welcome to Cut the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love, Shamika Michelle, and Wilfred Riley.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love alongside my co-host Shamika Michelle and Wilfred Riley. And our guest this week is David Bernstein. He is the founder of the Jewish Institute of Liberal Values and the author of a new book, Woke Anti-Semitism. I wish I had it to hold it up. Can you hold it up, Dave? Thank you. I don't have a physical copy, but I have read it. Dave, welcome to the show.
It's great to be with you again.
Well, we may get into that. It's not in the book, but I know I reached out to you. I knew the book was coming. And, people are like, well, come on, how can I be racist? Some of my best friends are Black. So I know a couple, 2, 3 Jewish people, right? So when all the stuff was jumping off from Kanye, a couple, 2, 3, right? I said, I'm not going to get on Twitter and fight. Like I said, when Kathy was on, I'm gonna go to the source. So I was emailing and calling people like, what do you think of that? Given the perspective like we talked about before. And Dave and I talked. He was at the airport on his way to Israel. I joked before we started recording that he's been to Israel twice since I talked to him. That was like 7 weeks ago. And he had the book coming out. I said, well, why don't you come on? We'll talk about this and more and the book. And he was gracious enough to come back. So let's start with the book. I'm sure we'll get to that because there's some parts in the book about the relationship between Jews and Blacks. But it's titled Woke Anti-Semitism. So I know people will start make their minds turn about what you mean by that. But because you do a good job of breaking down definitions. So I'll let you define the title. What do you mean by woke anti-Semitism?
Well, I have to say, I have a friend of mine who had just read McWhorter's book, Woke Racism. And he said, and I started telling him about the book I want to write. He said, you know what you're going to call it, don't you? And I was like, what's that? He goes, Woke Anti-Semitism. So I thought, okay, yeah, that's a good point. So what do I mean by that? I believe that this ideology that we talk a lot about that breaks people into neat groups of oppressor and oppressed, this binary ideology, that ideology is a permission structure for anti-Semitism. Because when you hold this stark division of oppressed versus oppressors, Jews who on average are going to succeed above the mean on many metrics are going to be lumped in with the oppressor class. They're going to be considered complicit in white supremacy. Mm-hmm. And so it's going to set us up for anti-Semitism from the far left, which we're already seeing. We've seen it for many years, but it's like the sort of ultimate accelerator of anti-Semitism on the left, because it is conditioning a generation of people to see the world in these stark terms. When my kids' school, for example, they're teaching them, according to this new anti-racist audit that they just completed, to recognize and resist systems of oppression. This is a major school system, a public school system where my son is a senior. They don't have to say the word Jew. They don't have to say the word Israel. People are going to make their own conclusions, because if they see that anybody who has success is an oppressor, if that's how they view the world, they're going to view Jews as oppressors. And I think that's what we're setting ourselves up for.
Mm-hmm. Will, any thoughts on that? Just the opening on woke anti-Semitism.
Yeah, well, I think what Dave said is actually really important, because if you actually look at, for example, the core of Dr. Kendi's argument or Robin DiAngelo's argument, it's that all gaps in performance between groups are due to racism. Mm-hmm. So there are no cultural differences between groups. There are no regional differences between groups. There are no genetic differences between groups. Although obviously I don't think that's the reason Jews outperform other Caucasians or whatever. But none of that matters. It's all racism. If you really believe that, it puts you in a weird position. Because the most successful people in the USA aren't Anglo-whites. They haven't been since the 1950s, right? So you've got Jewish Americans, you've got Asians. Now you see West Africans. I mean, even compared to Asians and Jews, Nigerians are extremely well educated. Probably a little bit of an affirmative action effect there, but not much. So, I mean, like, what do you do when you see like a West African Black guy and a Jewish guy?
Uh-oh.
who's descended from Holocaust survivors kicking everyone's ass when it comes to financial performance or educational performance. Now, the logical answer is, well, you say maybe my theory was wrong. But what we've actually seen is the lumping of all of these people into kind of that oppressor group. Like there was a school district in Washington that actually classified Asians as white. I mean, so like this big district that's up by Seattle. Asian students were doing better than any other group of students. And that was a real problem. Like anti-racism was the core of their curriculum, had been for a couple of years. So they just literally took all the Asian scores, and out on the West Coast, that's probably like a third of the students, and they shoved them together with the whites. And then they were like, look, non-people of color are outperforming people of color, which is like Indians and so on down the line. So yeah, it's iffy. I mean, I guess that's my take. My question for David, if we're kind of going in sequences, how do you think woke anti-Semitism compares in terms of danger to other forms of anti-Semitism? Because Jew hatred seems to be one of those few things that crosses left, right, black, white.
Right. And it can be a bit of a horseshoe where you see it on one end sort of morph into the other. So anti-Semitism on the right is a bit like a hurricane. It hits you, it's violent, it causes damage in the immediate term. Anti-Semitism on the left has been compared to climate change, where it's slow moving and it's corrosive in its effect. The problem is that people are very willing to talk about anti-Semitism on the right and its ideological underpinnings. So if you're talking about anti-Semitism on the right, you might say it's being caused by replacement theory or fueled by this great replacement theory, the idea that immigrants are replacing ordinary Americans and behind the scenes is the Jew sort of doing all the replacing. Or it's being
now, of
fueled
course,
by...
leaving the Jews aside, that theory is completely accurate. I mean, the left in the USA has been, but I mean, the left has been boasting about how we'll be a majority minority Democratic voting country. Sorry to all jump in, but as a political scientist, they've been talking this for 40 years. I mean, we all read the new emerging Democratic majority.
As we see taboo in the background. 10 things.
Right. You just created a new one. What is that? A new taboo?
11
taboo.
Noting that the population is changing. But sorry, go on, guys.
All right. Noting that, yes, that's better. Thank you for that clarification. So, you have this, to the degree that it's a dogma or an ideology or the most extreme form of that, of replacement theory, that lends itself to a kind of anti-Semitism if it's taken to its logical conclusion. In the Muslim world, you have Islamism and the idea of the infidel and the Jew and the Christian being the infidel. And again, that lends itself to anti-Semitism. The thing about wokeness and anti-Semitism is it's like a symptom without a cause. It is the form that shall not be named. So you can talk about anti-Semitism on the left being like climate change. The problem is nobody talks about the CO2 emissions that are coming out of wokeness that are producing the climate change on the left. And I'm saying it's time for us in the Jewish community to start naming it. If we can't say that this ideology, this binary ideology, is going to be weaponized against us and is being weaponized against us, if we can't say that over time this is going to disenfranchise us politically, then we're not going to be able to actually fight it because we're just going to be like, chasing shadows. We're not going to actually be dealing with it at the root cause.
Shamika, anything to add? Ha.
I don't know. I feel like I'm at such a disadvantage not growing up around Jewish people or growing up not even around white people, because maybe there were some Jewish people and I just didn't know they were Jewish. Like I do remember my mom babysitting for a Jewish family, but as a child, I thought that was just like religion. Like, oh, they celebrate Hanukkah, their kids don't get any presents. That's too bad,
They do now.
They do now.
Those kids are like, that's not fair.
We've learned from you all.
I don't know, growing up and getting older and realizing that it's much more than that, especially in the last few months with everything going on, I just feel like I don't have this, I don't want to say hate, but I don't think I have the hate that I need to be Black power all the way, you know, because I just did not experience some of the stuff that other people experienced when it comes to Jews. So I feel like I'm just kind of at a disadvantage and just watching everything play out and people getting so butthurt over things that I think they should not be heard about, or things that I think may be funny. And I'm just like, wow, goes much deeper than I would have ever imagined. Like, for me, for so long, everything was just black and white. Well, and now we got all this extra here.
Well, I think your voice is so important, and you're like, oh, I don't get it, but you're a great example, because I say this to people when I've had these conversations. I don't think that if Dave and I talked about that, but I've talked about it several times, and people kind of get it, and they're like, yeah, but obviously if you're Jewish and you grew up in a Jewish community and a Jewish family, you know, and you've seen some, even if you haven't seen it, you probably have, up close and personal, your family's telling you about it, you know about it, right? So you get that. So even if you're rational, when I tell you that, look, the average person simply doesn't know. It may come off as anti-Semitism, it may not, but they just like, I don't even know what you're talking about. The great example, you set Kyrie and Kanye aside. The Whoopi thing back in February, I was like, what Whoopi said was stupid, but they're suspended and all this other stuff. She literally, even after she did her mea culpa, she didn't know what she did wrong. She didn't say the Holocaust didn't exist. She didn't deny it. She didn't say it wasn't bad. She didn't say compare it to slavery and say we were worse. She just said all those people were white. And Dave writes about this from a different standpoint. But what I said to one of my friends was, how are you going to get mad at non-Jews for looking at Jews and saying, well, you're all white? When 90%, I think in the book, he said 92%. I was close. I said, when 90% of you go around saying you're white. And in the woke time, they'll say stuff like, well, I can't say that because only BIPOC people can say that. And as a white person, I can't say that. As a white person, I got to give you your space. So they keep saying that. Then they get mad at the black guy who says you're white, right? So you're an example for me that is how the non-political, the normal guy on the street thinks about this. And when I get pushed back from black people, it's like, no, black people, yeah. So the nation and the blacks in New York, right? But if you take them out, and they're not the majority of black people, the rest of the people have no idea what the rest of this stuff was until it kind of became in this, blew up in the echo chamber.
Yeah, I bet you, Shamika, you're more representative than probably a lot of the other people who have been like going off on Twitter on this. Like, your experience is more common.
Yeah.
But it does differ. And listen, I'm not somebody who's trying to go around pointing fingers at individual people and say, you're an anti-Semite, you're an anti-Semite, you're an anti-Semite. Look, Kanye, I mean, I think Kanye is a pretty sick dude, to be honest with you. Like, I just think that he's not well, and he's gone, and I mean, I don't know. I watched him with on Alex Jones with Nick Fuentes and his costume and everything else. I mean, I just thought he was nuts. Like,
well, at least you noticed the costume. Somebody called me and said, now what do you say? I said, you want me to comment on a guy who went on TV with his face covered? I mean, I got nothing to say. That's the only thing I got to say. You couldn't even see his face.
Right. If he didn't have whatever 50 million followers on social media and was like a cultural icon, I'd have like, it's the kind of guy you pass on the street and say he's just nuts, like he's just muttering a bunch of bullshit, and I'm not going to even worry about it. I hopefully he doesn't kill me along the way. But other than that, cool, you should be in a mental hospital. I mean, that's what I felt like. And it could have been anybody. And it didn't have, but Kyrie Irving was a little bit more disturbing to me because he recommended this film about the Black Hebrew Israelites. And these are people who have this very specific ideology that the Jews have stolen the covenant from Black people, and the Black people are the original Jews. And again, like, I've seen these dudes on like the street corner in Washington, D.C. and New York, and they're spouting off. And maybe I stop for like 30 seconds on my way to the subway or the metro and like hear them out. And then I said, whatever. But, when you have major sports figures starting to repeat them and get, hundreds of thousands of views, and you get people showing up at basketball games, I have to start taking you seriously. And the truth is that in New York in particular, and maybe only in New York, there's been a lot of attacks in sort of inner city New York against Orthodox Jews. Right. It was actually last year, 2020, it was one a week. Yeah. One a week. So that actually changes the quality of life for people, and you have to take that seriously, in my view.
No, 100%. Now, most of the people didn't. Oh, go ahead, Shamika. You're on mute.
I'd like to go on record that I feel like Kanye is a genius. I just wanted to say that. But when it comes to Kyrie, David, do you think that the response to him sharing the film kind of blew it up bigger than what it was? Because like I follow him on Twitter. I'd have never thought about even going to watch the film just based on his tweet until people started saying, oh my God, it's so terrible. Like I'm
now
not.
You've seen it 3 times.
Huh?
I said, now you've seen it 3 times.
Yeah, it's like now.
Right.
Well, no, I couldn't sit through it, but
It's crazy. No.
yeah, it was too much for me. But like I never would have even wanted to watch it because I'm familiar with Hebrews or the Israelites or whatever. And it's just not been something that has really caught my attention. So him even tweeting that, like, it wasn't until they made a big deal that I'm like, okay, you're telling me now that this man can't tweet whatever he wants to. Now I want to watch it because I'm rebellious. Like the thing to tell me not to do something, that's how I'm going to do it because you're telling me I can't, and I don't like to be told I can't. And so I feel like they made it a bigger deal than I think it would have been if no one would have said anything. I don't think that film would have gotten the recognition that it did.
Yeah,
maybe a
that's how
little
you know
bit.
that we Jews don't actually operate in a conspiracy, is that if we did, we would have gotten together and said, keep your damn mouth shut and don't respond to that. All it takes is a few goofballs with a big Twitter following or whatever, or an email list or whatever. And once they start, if people like me, who I think is more rational, don't actually respond to it, then we're abandoning the field to the most crazy interpretation. So then you just get this pile on after a while. Now, I don't want to blame the Jewish community for what an irresponsible act of an NBA player. I mean, you shouldn't post videos that, that basically call an entire people a fraud. I mean, it's just kind of an.
Should it have not been on Amazon?
I was just gonna say, but it should be available to rent on Amazon.
Yeah,
like, one of the things
I'm a free speaker,
actually
man.
really notable about this whole thing, at least from what I've seen from just a lot of people like playing basketball, just living in a diverse community, is that the whole thing Kanye West said was like, and Kyrie too, to some extent, like, you can't talk about the Jews or there'll be this mass move to shut you down. And I mean, in response to what Kanye and Kyrie did, there obviously was extraordinary backlash. So Kanye West ended up, he fell out of the ranks of billionaires and so on down the line. Kyrie Irving was suspended for 5 games. So to some extent, it is kind of better to ignore crazy stuff when you can. I think this is true across all racial lines.
I agree.
But like a lot of people I know are actually, and not like academic friends that happen to be Black, but are kind of taking that position. Like, look what happened. Brother Kanye he stepped up, said you can't talk about certain things, and they ruined him. So I mean, I think that is the risk you run if someone comes forward and is like, if you say anything about Blacks in this society, you'll be destroyed, because the African American community does it too. And that person is immediately then deplatformed and fired from their job, and they can't get on planes. The reaction from a lot of people is going to be, well, that didn't necessarily disprove his original claim. And that distracts from how crazy, what is it, Hebrews to Negroes is. And that actually, incidentally, I assume, David, you're not Black. Don't want to assume.
I'm not Black. I'm half Middle Eastern. That basically.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it's not good or bad one way or another. But I mean, one thing, if you're in the Black community, Black Americans, probably for similar reasons, are doing what Irish Americans used to do about 100 years ago, which is sort of saying that everything was invented by Black people. This is actually pretty frequent. So like, there are whole books about this, like the first Jews were in fact Black, the Queen of Sheba was Black, the light bulb and the potato were invented by, so on. So I think Kyrie was kind of in that almost harmless tradition of like, look what we invented. And some rabbis and so on were like, Judaism? What's you fucking idiot? And that kind of led to this backlash with people going at each other racially, but the actual shutdown continued the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, I wouldn't have been the path I chose, The problem is once it's out there, it's hard to put back, and you're just dealing with the backlash at that point, just like you're dealing with it. I'm dealing with it, and you could say, okay, is it a teaching moment now? It also got interesting when Dave Chappelle got in, and here's where I carve out a lot of space for comedians. Like, I think comedians play an indispensable role in society, and we need them to be able to trade in stereotypes to a degree, like, because otherwise we're just going to be just a bunch of boring people walking on eggshells all the time. And so even though, I wish Chappelle didn't sort of throw fuel on the fire in the way he did. He's a comedian, and I'm pretty much going to give him carte blanche as much as possible. And plus, it was funny. Mm-hmm. And when something's funny, I'm like, okay, it's funny. So the problem with comedy, though, to a degree, is that all of a sudden these comedians go into sort of political commentary mode. So there were a few times when Chappelle wasn't being a comedian; he was just being another commentator. And I want to be able to say, well, if you're going to do that, I might critique you. But I don't, it all happened at once, and it created this big ruckus that Jews and blacks are at each other's throats. Mm-hmm. I think that that's not true, by the way. I think that there's certainly a lot of collaboration in a lot of sectors, and there's a lot of goodwill and so forth. And that doesn't mean that there's not a problem in a very particular segment of the black community. I mean, by the way, there are racist Jews. I mean, they're not everywhere, and I haven't really heard a racial epithet against a black person in my own Jewish circles for a long time, but I grew up hearing stuff like that, and so I believe that there is a certain segment. It's probably more in New York City where there's people are living in a pressure cooker, and that's why you got to at least be on guard about some of these conspiracy theories, because they can cause violence. I mean, there was a black Hebrew who walked into a kosher grocery store and shot it up everybody a couple years ago. So that's an example of how these things can actually go awry,
Mm-hmm. Now, back to the woke anti-Semitism. What I wanted to say is that isn't part of the problem, and you talk about, you've done a lot of podcasts and you write a lot about this, that, I mean, the ideology is stupid to begin with, but beyond that, the reason why it's so bad is because in the Jewish community, since you're writing specifically a lot about that, they either think like you and they're silent, or they're doubling down by they're joining on. Like, no people. I think you mentioned you write a little bit about Black Lives Matter, but of course, I really write about Black Lives Matter. And my point is that they're not about the things they talk about, but people forget old school. And I think you mentioned it. Everybody talked about the nuclear family thing that they took down from the site, but they started early on, like after a year. BDS was one of the main pillars. Like, and whether you agree with that or not, you know what that leads to. But my point was, so a black organization that was founded to end police brutality, why are they talking about Israel? What does one have to do with the other? But it was on their website for about a year and a half, right?
Yeah.
But then George Floyd dies. And, it's like the civil rights movement again, where the Jews were one of the first ones to support the Jews were all like, yes, Black Lives Matter. I got a banner. Hate has no home here. And they just dove, both feet in, right?
They did. You said the ideology itself is stupid. And I'm remembering Jonathan Haidt's recent article about structural stupidity in society, that he believes we're going through a period of structural stupidity. And I have to say, some anti-Semitism is kind of just stupid. Like, the idea that like Jews are like coordinating with each other to dominate industries. I mean, most of these Jews, if they're at the top of their industry, they probably hate the other Jewish guy who's their competitor.
They're just as selfish as anybody else.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're going to hear Jews trash talking other Jews in Hollywood every day. And so it's not like they're this cabal that's coordinating with each other. So anti-Semitism is stupid. And what I worry about is the stupider society becomes, and woke ideology is one sort of source of stupidity, the more anti-Semitism you get, and
anti-everybody, really.
Anti-everybody, right. And in some ways, I'm going to be very honest with you. Like, I wrote about woke anti-Semitism because I want to wake up the Jewish community to the problem of wokeness. Like, a lot of Jewish organizations are buying into wokeness.
Buying into it.
And I can say till I'm blue in the face that you've got to watch out. This is a form of illiberalism. It's shutting down discourse. It's causing all kinds of societal ills, and no one will listen to me. But when I start talking about how it's going to lead to anti-Semitism, some people are like, huh, maybe I've got to pay attention here. Now, I am worried about it, by the way. I don't want to downplay it. I mean, I am worried that, that as nutty as society is going to become, they're going to become nuttier toward the Jews. But I'm much more worried in the end about the larger picture and what's happening in America.
And that's just your one approach. It's kind of like, Shamika, it's kind of like when I talked about, so he's saying, how can I get these otherwise, normal Jews to understand that this is a problem for everybody? And if I put something specific to Jews, then they'll pay attention. It's kind of like when you talk about CRT, whatever you want to call it, what they're teaching in school is bad. They're like, so what? Who cares about those upper middle class white kids? They can do some good learning about the Black history. But then when I tell my Black friends, they're telling the Black kids that they got to learn a special way. Then they're like, what? Then they get all upset, right? So sometimes you just have to put it in a way that they hear it and think that it's going to affect them, because we're all individuals, we care about ourselves. So if the Jews might be treated a little bit, brought down the peg, they're high up anyway. But wait a minute, you telling me it might affect me, it might affect my income? Because you're talking about woke anti-Semitism, David, but a lot of this is just what I said is stupid. Anti-Semitism, of course, is, but I was talking about the wokeness. I was talking about this equity under all circumstances. Remove all the men and just let the women. Remove all the white people. You can come. You talk about. We'll get into that, but you talk about going to places that you have to fight to get in, and they'll say, "Fine, you can come, but you sit over in the corner and you don't talk, and you just listen and let the BIPOC voices lead." So, Shamika, wouldn't you say that his approach to getting more people to listen to and fight back against wokeness is a sound and unique one?
Oh yeah, I definitely think so. And I'm actually glad that he's doing it. And I'm glad that I actually have a Jewish friend that I can,
I got a couple, 2, 3. You just got one. You got to catch up.
Yeah, I need to. Well, I got him and Batya, and I have a few more.
Okay.
Yeah, got a few more in my pocket.
I didn't know Batya was Jewish.
Come on, she went to Star David everywhere she goes.
There is.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's actually an Orthodox Jew.
Yeah.
Really?
And born in Israel. I think she was raised in Israel most of her life.
Yeah. I thought she was Persian for some reason. This doesn't matter at all. It was just, okay.
Yeah, cool. I never would have thought that either, but I don't know how to recognize them, so that's just me.
Yeah, so that means
I have to give you some lessons, Shamika.
But you still
we'll get
the Star of David is a good clue, I will say. I feel a little
I've never even noticed it.
Right. But Dave,
I don't wear one, so you're not going to see that in me.
See? That just makes it hard.
Yeah. But I have some pretty stereotypical traits, so whatever. But I'll help you. I'll help you develop your Judar.
But David, here's another interesting thing though that I like, because you write about you talk about Shabbat dinners too, but you talk about debate, right? How it's just, embedded in the Jewish culture. And I remember that. I told you I got some friends. I've been to some dinners. We get into these robust debates about everything. That's how it's supposed to be. You sit down at dinner. You gave an example with your kids and how you try to do that. Is that still as strong in the Jewish culture as it used to be? Because I feel like when you show up to Shabbat dinner in the non-Jew people who run organizations like you, what you're going to get is, boy, Trump sure is bad. Boy, I'm so glad we got Biden. Everything's so great. And then maybe they'll talk about some attack that they've seen.
Yeah, look, I still think Jewish debate culture is alive and well, but it's dying in certain segments. If you start telling everybody that you have all the answers, and you tell everybody that they can't debate the most important issues in public and social life. I mean, the issues that the voices that wokeness suppresses are on, in my mind, some of the most important issues we face as society. Why is there disparity? What can we do to lift people up? What does it mean to have equality? Those are really important issues in society, and wokeness puts sort of it stomps it out. And so a lot of Jews, unfortunately, are going along with that trend. Oh, we can't talk about that, or really, there's only one way to see this issue. And I think that's gonna make Shabbat dinner a lot less interesting in many homes. But I still find it a lot, and it might be that I seek out people who are open to ideas, of course.
I think that's what
like
it is, unfortunately. I'm a cynic. I think that's what it is.
But, you know what I wish like I noticed when all of this stuff kind of got to the height of everything, I noticed a lot of like regular people that I never would have known was Jewish was like, oh, this is anti-Semitic and they're putting us in danger. And
You said
while
us, I
that
found
may
one.
be, yeah, but while that may be true, I'm trying to wrap my brain around that because I was thinking a lot of times ain't nobody talking about your broke ass when they talk about the elites. You are not included in that. So cut it out. And it was almost like they were just waving the flag, like, hey, they're talking about me. And no, they weren't. If you're not in a position of power, like, I don't really think the focus was on a Jewish person in, I don't know, Oakland or something. I don't know. Yeah. Idaho, you don't count. You just as oppressed as the rest of us.
Go ahead, Will.
No, yeah. I mean, so like there's a lot going on. I mean, first of all, I actually agree with a lot of that when people criticize the elites, and this would be true for whites or blacks as well, they're not necessarily talking about like some random ass guy they were in the army with. But there's a lot more. So 3 points, I guess, kind of getting coherent, trying to break these each down to one sentence. A lot of the stuff that we've seen recently is just straight up anti-Semitism, like full stop. Like Kanye West, I mean, brilliant guy, but I mean, one of his quotes was, "I like Hitler." And I actually listened to that because I tend to think the media overhypes things. So I saw these headlines like Kanye West makes anti-Semitic comments popping up on my Facebook and Twitter. And so I decided to pull up the interview live and see what this brother had said because I assumed it would be exaggerated. And the first two things I saw were him confirming that he liked Hitler and him doing this thing where he represented Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu with an orange net and a can of Yahoo, and he had them like chasing or eating one another around the table. And it was like, okay, that guy actually is an anti-Semite. So point two, though, I guess there's a second real question about this kind of thing, which is not necessarily related to the points that have been made so far, but like when people talk about stochastic terrorism and so on, how much danger does saying crazy shit actually produce in reality? This is something that may be my next academic article. And from what I've seen, it's not really that much. I mean, if there were really a trackable relationship between this and murder rates, like you would have seen over the past 3 years when every national mass media outlet was falsely claiming that police were genociding black people, you would have seen massive surges in interracial crime. You did see some riots, but I mean, that sort of stuff like Chernobyl on Fox News primetime, like every day, an innocent unarmed black man is murdered. These are quotes. I mean, I think you would see that, you would expect that to have a trackable effect. I don't necessarily see that. People say all kinds of
Right. I guess it comes out of the Jewish historical consciousness. Nazi Germany is still very much alive, and people said, well, they're just words or whatever. And so Jews are alert to that. I think it's been passed down from generation to generation. When in Europe, they were passing around the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was a conspiracy theory. You had these rampages, these pogroms in Jewish community, killing hundreds of people. So that's still in our consciousness, and we're worried, maybe too worried, arguably, that these words are going to lead to violence, and sometimes they do lead to violence, even in the United States. Again, I don't think we're on the precipice of another, Holocaust or anything like that. And I think it can sometimes be overstated. What I worry more about on woke anti-Semitism is political disenfranchisement. And that's
a very valid point. But to finish kind of the last kind of half of a sentence about like the quantitative part of this for me, I think the moving it back to the woke angle is actually pretty interesting because one, I don't know if there's a trackable relationship. I think people should start looking more at that. Like, does speech radicalize people? If so, to what extent? Criminal justice has looked at this a little with like 8kun. And I do think there's a point, by the way. Like the website 8kun used to have a mass shooter message board where people that were interested in committing mass shootings would talk. Like, what would be a target if I'm going at, this is not a joke, what would be a target if I'm going after Muslims, whites, Jews, blacks? And that was taken down. And I think you could say, okay, that's over the line. In general, I'm not sure what relationship we see there, but another point is that there's more of this kind of crazy talk on the left than the right, in my experience. So, like, if you're talking about people saying nutty anti-Semitic stuff, I mean, you'd probably have to start with, Ilhan Omar comes to mind, or Rashida Tlaib, who has a map of the Middle East that doesn't have Israel on it. I mean, just like so on down the line, like the BLM statements on CNN. So, like, I get a death threat about every 4 days on Twitter. And it's always from like some trans activist with an anime character as a profile picture. So one, like any actual attempt to crack down on stochastic terrorism would be insanely broad. But two, and I think here we agree, a lot of people would be stunned to realize that it would target the political left as much as the right. So there's a lot there. People do confuse. In America, we don't like to talk about class. So people do confuse the actual ruling class elite with specific groups like Jews, whites, Northerners, so on. It's actually rich people that you're talking about. Right. Americans don't get that. Point two, a lot of this stuff was crazy anti-Semitic. Point three, what's the effect of that? People should look at it, and I think more of it comes from the political, woke, rainbow-haired people than you'd expect, probably most of it.
Yeah, but look, the guy who went up and shot up a synagogue in Squirrel Hill, Pennsylvania, read and talked about how the Jews were bringing in all these Mexicans in on our border, and he had to stop it. And he went in and shot up a synagogue and killed 11 people in the process. It doesn't take that. You have a conspiracy theory, maybe the core group of people who believe in some version of that conspiracy theory. Let's say it's 5% of society, but that in a society as large as America, that's 20 million people. So if you have 20 million people who believe something, then maybe only 2 million believe the most extreme version of that, and only of that 1% would ever consider picking up a gun and walking into a synagogue and shooting up people. But that's a lot of people still. And
that's probably the same number of people without the conspiracy theory. That's the same number of people who are violent, the same number of people willing to murder.
Right. Yeah. So you worry, though, that if it's given an expression in a very particular way, like Jewish organizations now have to all have elaborate security. Like I used to be able to go into synagogue, there was never a cop. I'd go there, or JCC, Jewish Community Center, never a cop. Now, there'll be 2 or 3 cops in a police car with, because we're worried, and because there have been threats. There just a couple of weeks ago, there were these 3 guys who were.
Yeah, stop. I was just going to say that. Let's go the other way. So you're going to talk about the guys that got caught before they carried out their terror attack on the train. But I would argue that they got caught because they were chatting. And if we somehow eliminated the chat, they're still crazy anti-Semites, but now they're going dark, and now you don't catch them.
The other question, guys, though, is how you eliminate the chat. So, like the craziest attempted domestic terror.
I want to catch them.
I'm not sure David does want to, but I think
no, I'm not trying to eliminate chat. I'm a free speecher.
Yeah,
I mean, there are, I'm not, so I'm just saying that sometimes crazy conspiracy theories can lead to murder. That's all I'm saying, is that I see a
and so could sandwiches.
That can happen.
Well, no, I don't think what Dave is saying is quite at the sandwich, like, there's correlation between ice cream sales and murder level that we all learned in college. But I do want to say this one thing here, though. I don't think people that talk about like the stochastic terror idea that was really trendy on the left and in the CJ papers and so on this past summer really understand what trying to stop that would mean. Yep. It would be like the COVID just one life, like where you shut down society to prevent like a 10% increase in the death rate concentrated among 80-year-olds. I don't think you can logically justify that. But an example, like the congressional baseball game shooter was motivated by Bernie Sanders. So like Bernie gave a very passionate speech where he's like, these damn Republicans, there's even some truth to this versus European healthcare, but these damn Republicans are killing your grandmother. I mean, people are not covered by health insurance. This is murder. And a guy heard that. He was a left-wing activist. He grabbed his rifle and he went and shot a bunch of congressmen. It's only through, the fortunes of the Most High that I think 8 of them didn't die. So you can't stop politicians from giving fiery speeches. And I think those probably cause a great deal more violence than Kyrie Irving saying stupid crap. Now, with that said, of course, we can condemn anti-Semitism, but what's the solution is a real question there.
Right.
Yeah, look, I think the solution is multifaceted. One is, look, and it's not really just a solution to anti-Semitism. The solution is to start to build a new coalition of people who stand up for democratic values and liberalism and so forth, because an illiberal society is a society that's most likely to produce anti-Semitism and other problems. Right. In other words, that's what I'm ultimately worried about, is that our society is becoming stupid. As I said before, structurally stupid. And so what I really want to do is say, listen, there are a lot of people, well-meaning, thoughtful, moderate people. There are Blacks, Jews, Indians, Chinese people who want to put a stop to this. And I think my first stop in all this, my first effort would be to build a coalition of people like the ones on this podcast right now, and add Chinese people and Indian Americans and others, just to stand up for those overarching values in society. I think that there are other things that we can do. I do think when things get crazy, politicians should stand up and say, that's just wrong. I don't condone that. I think we need some guardrails and discourse. That doesn't mean that I want some 23-year-old progressive censor at Twitter deciding what's racism or what's, transphobia or whatever. But I don't know what to do about Twitter and some of these social media platforms that if there's no moderation, they just become cesspools. I don't know how to handle that. I think at the algorithmic level, there's probably some things you could do. And I do agree, Will, that like the left is a huge problem. I mean, not, I think it's less violent, but in the long run, I'm worried that if this ideology continues unabated, that Israel will be perceived as a settler colonial state, and that will be discredited in the Democratic Party. And that the United States, which has been traditionally a pro-Israel country, will sound a lot more like Western Europe than it has in the past. And that Israel, as a small country, needs the American support. So like there are real world consequences of this ideology that will affect my way of life. Whether you call them anti-Semitism or not is another question. Like, I'm not sure that's anti-Semitism. You could say it is, it isn't. But I worry that it's going to fundamentally change what it means to be Jewish in America.
So, Shamika, you had a question.
Well, I wanted to go on record again as saying I understood Kanye's comment about liking or loving Hitler, but I want to tell y'all why, and I want y'all to give me your feedback, simply because I know that, like, I think he's like a new Christian, and sometimes they're very they're like zealots and they are over the top, but because of Luke 6:27 that says, love your enemies, do good to them which hate you, bless them that curse you, and pray for them which despitefully use you. And I remember Erykah Badu some years ago saying the exact same thing about Hitler. And so it's like, I wonder if because Kanye was already in the fire, did that make it worse? Or am I just being too loving and thinking that he is just really trying to maybe not go above and beyond, because it's what the scripture says, but do you think that maybe we just didn't understand it, or he was just, because I just can't see him justifying what Hitler did, but I understand the concept of trying to find something good in him because of scripture.
Yeah, look, the Jewish experience, it's not that long ago since Hitler ordered the mass murder of our people, right? I mean, we have family who are still alive that lived through the hellfires of death camps and concentration camps, who were stuck in trains, and this is in our lifetime, right? And it's a very fresh wound for Jews, and Hitler wasn't just a guy who wanted to go around and kill people. He had a plan. I mean, he brought the finest minds of the legal profession and scientists and engineers to a conference in a place called Wannsee, and they sat around and drank brandy and plotted the mass murder of my people. They were so obsessed with what they were doing that they chose to divert trains from the Russian front where they were losing the war so that they could kill more Jews quicker. So we're a bit intolerant of tolerance when it comes to particularly Hitler and Nazis. Now, I understand there's something in Christianity that, love thy neighbor, and I understand that, and maybe there was a little bit of that in Kanye. I heard a lot more, though, in what he said. It wasn't just about scripture. He didn't cite scripture. He simply,
but he kept saying Jesus is king. Like, he said it so much, I got tired of hearing it.
Will, I want to move on. So, Will, do you have a reply? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, I follow an older deity, and she does not tell me to love my enemies. But at any rate, I see Shamika's point. Honestly, no, that for me personally, I think that was like really well put as an argument there from a Christian perspective. But no, I mean, my take was that Kanye West actually praised Hitler a lot more than you ever have to praise Hitler. So at one point, I mean, he said, everyone contributed to the world, especially Hitler. Like, it wasn't a sort of least of these comment among Christians in my read. I mean, at another point, he started giving Hitler credit for this whole series of inventions like modern boom microphones. And it's worth noting that, I mean, like, he came there with Nick Fuentes, who's one of the country's leading scumbag, racist anti-Semites, apparently a witty guy in person. And it's funny, he's a white supremacist despite being Mexican. Like, the dirty jobs Americans don't necessarily want to do. I don't know his origin status, born here or not. But at any rate, but with all the jokes aside, I mean, like, Fuentes obviously had a hand in some of that. He was with Milo Yiannopoulos, who seems to be a self-hating, I believe, former Jew who's converted to Christianity, now says he's an ex-gay. So that wasn't the impression I got. Like, he went through a whole list of these Jewish figures like Benjamin Netanyahu, so on down the line. He said Jewish lawyers are trying to take his family away. So, I mean, to me, I understand Kanye West's new Christianity, but it just sounded like kind of a racist rant. And he said a lot of other stuff too. It doesn't affect me listening to his music sometimes, but I mean, he said like Balenciaga wasn't really grooming the kids, right? Like, Jesus would want us to forgive Balenciaga, especially Balenciaga. And I noticed they didn't drop him from the contract yet. So it's
I thought they did.
Did they? Well,
I thought they did. Yeah.
Well,
I know he did speak against them in a different one, but I was just, that's my whole, like, when I hear Christians saying no, 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 then I just always go to the Bible, like, but this is what the Bible says. So I was just wondering, like, am I being too nice or too,
Probably.
You're being
I think there was a little more Hitler love than there had to be. I'm more with Genghis Khan when it comes to how to treat your enemies. There's nothing finer and all that. But anyway.
Yeah, now I want my enemies to suffer. I'm not there.
Burn their entire city to drive them before you to hear the lamentations of their women. That guy accomplished that guy did what many lesser ruler types have tried successfully, and he wasn't racist either.
So, Dave, to your book, we talked about the Shabbat dinner and the debate. So, usually when we get together, we got to have a little back and forth. So I figured I'd save that part. So I'm glad that you have a unique approach to this wokeness, because we need all takes because they're crazy. But I'm reading the book and I can hear your voice because we've had these conversations. So I'm getting mad at you, Dave. I'm like, why you start off with defining the term so well, and then your liberalism came in and you kept giving up. He gave him too much to me. I don't know if you got to this part, but he's like, well, yeah, I get what you're saying. So he's in the negotiations with the liberal, with the left, right? The wokes. Yeah. And he's trying to get them to understand. But it's like, yeah, I agree.
Like target audience, Charles.
I agree with you. Systemic racism is killing all the blacks. That's true. But still, shouldn't we just not do, I'm like, Dave, stop giving into this, this happened because the blacks are this and this kind of so I don't know if it's part of your approach, but when you describe when you're invited to the places and they're like, well, we need more Jews of color. And you're like, well, I'll contend that there are not enough Jews of color in the room. We should do something about that. But I mean, no, we shouldn't. No, we shouldn't. We should not be carving out spaces for Jews of color. Yeah. And when
that was me struggling at that time, look.
This was 2-3 years ago. So now you
right. In 2016, I go to a meeting that was organized by a group of Black Jews with Black Lives Matter, and we're at this meeting, and we're basically told, us non-Black Jews, to sit down and shut up and listen. And then a group of people told us that we had exploited our whiteness and we had oppressed them and we were complicit in oppression. and we were sort of put through a struggle session. And, so when I'm talking about it at that time, I'm sort of airing out what I was going through.
Okay, this is 16, 17, 18, not today.
2016. So then you fast forward, by the time we get to 2020, George Floyd, I was at wit's end at that point.
Dave, you had me on your podcast, and you were like, "So Charles, you don't think that blacks are oppressed? No.
We had a debate. You and I had a debate on systemic racism.
You don't think systemic racism?
And I love pointing to that. Like, I actually took that out as a clip, and I point to it because it's me arguing with you that there's systemic racism.
I'm like, no, he's like, but it is. So why black people in jail then? I'm like, because they broke the law? All of them? Yeah.
Yes.
No, I don't know. You got to listen to that again. It was a little bit more nuanced than that. But look, I'm arguing to the Jewish community, to the liberal world, that I believe that there's racism, and it explains some of the disparities that we see in the world, but it's not the catch-all explanation of why there's differences, and that we have to be honest. And I know, Will, you talk about fatherhood and the lack of fathers in the inner city. You have to be able to talk about those explanations, because if you don't, you're actually might not be dealing with the biggest problem. So I try to do that. But I want to be alert to the possibility that I'm wrong, and I'm going to always listen to people. I just want there to be a conversation. Like, I could be wrong about how much racism, what that explains and doesn't explain. And somebody with a better argument or better data than I have might be able to push me in a different direction. But if I can't have the conversation, I won't even know if I'm wrong about it.
That's totally true. And you can probably reach into circles and areas that we can't. So you got to give them a little bit. It just makes me cringe. But if you got to give them a little bit, that's fine. Hopefully
that's where I come from. I'm not a conservative. Like, I'm basically a pretty liberal guy. Like, I want there to be healthcare for everybody. I want there to be immigration. I want there, and so I'm still in a conversation with the left.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing at Shamika's face. She's thinking, hold it, don't forget. Too quick, because I know they got to go. I want to at least get these in. If you got time to stay, Shamika, you can get to that. But two things. One interesting thing that I think is really interesting, you talked about Jews marrying non-Jews, right? After a period of people like, okay, anti-Semitism has gone down. We're free. We can move around freely. Not like you being some, racist against it, but an interesting problem that it creates in, are you marrying yourselves out of existence? I kind of laughed thinking of Shamika as I'm reading it. I was like, he got to sound like Umar Johnson.
Yeah, right. No, I was talking about a period of time in the early 1990s when things were looking up. Everybody was happy. Like, the Berlin Wall comes down, and the forces of liberalism in the world seem to be prevailing, and everything is up. And yet the intermarriage rate in the Jewish community is at 50%, and we Jews are being, marrying ourselves out of existence. And and there are people who, by the way, were saying that we were being bigoted by even talking about it. And that was another form of wokeness that I thought was destructive,
That's fun. And then lastly, your thoughts on Arafat. Yasser Arafat.
Yes, Arafat?
Yeah.
I don't know. He was just... Look,
because I remember I'm a couple years younger than you, and when he got the Nobel Prize, I was like, "Wait a minute, are we gonna be like, thanks for not bombing anymore? So we're gonna reward you?" And we know where his funds were going even after that. So since you wrote about it, it made me think about that all over again. So looking back,
I don't have any specific thoughts about him. I don't think he was a great leader. I don't think he was a peacemaker. I don't think he brought his people into peace. He could have, by the way, cut a deal in 2000 with the Israelis at Camp David, and he didn't. Right. So I think he should be viewed as a grand failure.
Good. I figured as much, but I went there. You still thinking, Shamika? What was it?
No, I was just wondering when he said immigration. I was wondering, was it legal? I mean,
well, come on.
Do we have a cap?
I'm for legal immigration. I'm not for unmitigated immigration. I don't think we should just like open up the floodgates and let everybody in. But I think immigrants are, generally speaking, good for society. Like, they bring an energy here. We don't reproduce at a rapid enough pace to sort of sustain the kind of
Some
economic
story just
growth
came
we
out
need.
the other day that we're dying. We're all dying.
So I think immigration is healthy to a degree. I get it that if you bring in too many people too quickly and it disrupts too many communities, you get a backlash. And I think we've seen that in society. So even though sort of economically and socially, I like the idea of immigration, I understand that it might has to be regulated to a degree so you don't get that backlash.
Right.
Look at
I
that.
do have another question though. Do you think the definition for anti-Semitism is like too strict?
Like we're calling, yeah, look, we could talk, there's a very elaborate definition that a lot of Jews adhere to about it. I'm not saying to go around and call everybody an anti-Semite who might violate the terms of this definition, right? Like, I think we should do that very sparingly. Like, Nick Fuentes, I have no problem saying that guy's just an anti-Semite, right? I don't really have a problem saying that about Kanye either. I think he's pretty much crossed all the red lines. Doesn't mean Gold Digger's not a great song. It just means
I don't really know his music.
Okay,
so,
it is a great song.
It's a song he wrote about Jews.
And so, so it's just that
I didn't even think about the money in that when I said that. I'm sorry.
That was
David didn't hear it.
anti-Semitic.
David didn't hear it. I'd be in trouble. He'd hang up.
I lost it. Yeah.
I said
the recording.
You said Gold Digger was a great song, and Shamika's like, I don't know his music. I say it's the song he wrote about Jews.
He might have. I don't know. Maybe. No, it's about women who's a gold digger. That's what he was writing about.
Right.
So you could say it was a bit misogynistic. Look, I don't think we should be going around calling everybody anti-Semites. I think that should be very rare. And I don't think we should be accusing people of anti-Semitism very often. I think, though, we can talk about anti-Semitism in a more general sense, that certain conditions are going to create it, and we should work against those conditions. That's what I try to do. You have to talk about specific examples, though, and in any book, for it to make sense to people. So I do that, but I'm not looking, like, my first impulse is not to go around like finding a violation and wagging my finger at somebody's face and calling them an anti-Semite.
And then I know we're right at the time that they all need to leave. I thank you again, but I want to just lastly say that the book was great. People should read it. I'm only, and I want to let you know, it's not that bad. I'm only slightly offended as I read it that, Nicole Levitt and Batya Ungar-Sargon and Carol Markowitz and all these people I know, and in there, no quotes from us. No Cut the Bull crew in the book.
You're going to be in my next volume. Okay. I'm just going to commit right now.
Okay.
So,
I think the shout outs were all over the book, and somehow, alas, I was missing. But
were the other people Jewish though? Maybe
there were non-Jews in the book too.
No, some of them weren't. I mean, look, there were 5 1776 colleagues in there. Glenn, John McWhorter, not you though. Coleman Hughes. Did you want me to keep going? I would stop. But anyway. But otherwise, a wonderful book, a wonderful.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
You should check it out.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it with you all.
Yeah, and he is David Bernstein, the founder of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values and the author of book Antisemitism. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks a million.
All right.
Country to say, God bless the US of A, land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to say, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving a day.